This one? Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Beef Cattle Research Council, which is who I work for. The Beef Cattle Research Council has been around for about a dozen years, established in 2001, and the mandate of the BCRC is to fund research that will contribute to the competitiveness, sustainability of Canada's beef cattle industry. So I'm a staff person. I'm the science director. There's two other staff as well. There's Andrea Brocklebank, who is the research manager. She's the boss of the place, but fortunately she's on mat leave, so the minions get their way for a while. Just kidding. Andrew's awesome. And the other BCRC staff is Tracy Sakach, who's in charge of the extension tech transfer part of our gig, and you'll hear a bit from her later. So we're staff, and we kind of do the grunt work, the heavy lifting kind of thing, but the actual decisions around what research priorities are and what kind of funding decisions get made, those decisions actually get made by producers, and the council itself is 11 producers, and they're appointed by their provincial association. So here in Alberta's got a lot of cows, so we get 4 representatives here in Alberta. Saskatchewan's got 2, Ontario's got 2, Manitoba, BC, and the Atlantic provinces each get 1. So 1 for all the Atlantic provinces. Add them all together, there's about 11 of them. Here's Alberta's current delegates. So on the top left, we got John Shooten. He's from Diamond City. Larry Delver's in the middle. He's from near Calgary somewhere. In Calgary, okay. Kathy Sharp is from somewhere near Red Deer, right? Lacombe area. And so Zone 5. And Brian Edge, Doc Edge at the bottom, he's from Cochrane. So those are your Alberta ABP reps to the BCRC. So we're funded by the National Checkoff Dollar, and so is Canada Beef Inc., who's in charge of the marketing stuff. Oh, great, this is wonderful. This slide busted. In Alberta, when producers sell cattle in Alberta, every time they sell cattle, they pay a $3 checkoff. And that $2 checkoff is the $2 of that is the provincial checkoff, and that is used to fund provincial activities like ABP's provincial advocacy with the provincial government, ABP policy, ABP's research, their marketing, promotion, that kind of thing, communication. The CCA is actually funded out of that $2 provincial checkoff as well. That's the way it works in every province. Every province gets assessed some share of their cattle herd, essentially, to help fund the CCA's national activities in terms of federal advocacy, trade issues, legal issues, national policy. So when the CCA is busy with issues like RCAF, trade disputes, COOL, the European Free Trade Agreement, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership, those kind of activities are paid out of the provincial checkoff. Now, there's also a $1 national checkoff. This national checkoff is not refundable. The $2 is, this $1 isn't. And this $1, it's national checkoff, it gets paid, it gets used to fund Canada Beef Inc., so their marketing and promotion activities, and it also funds BCRC's research activities. A lot of people get confused here, and they think that $1 national checkoff funds the CCA. That's not the case. The CCA gets funded out of the provincial checkoff. So there you go. Tell everyone you know. So we take all of the dollars that come to the BCRC, and it adds up to about $1 million a year, which isn't a lot. We can't, well, I mean, it's a lot of money, but we can't fund research. It's expensive. You can't do a lot of research for $1 million. And so what we do is use those dollars to pry more dollars out of the government. And for the most part, it's federal government dollars that we're leveraging. And at this point, we're managing to turn every research dollar into about $6 in research funds. So, and the way we're doing that is through something called the Beef Science Cluster, and that is a joint thing between Ag Canada and ourselves. So Ag Canada is kind of the largest government funder on the national scene, and BCRC is the largest industry not-for-profit funder on the national scene. And kind of the idea is that Ag Canada's got really good research stations, they got really good scientists, they got a lot more money than us, and their mandate is to fund, part of their mandate is to fund applied beef and forage research. BCRC isn't like that at all. We don't have scientists, we don't have facilities, we don't have a lot of money, but we are pretty well connected with industry, and so we can really help to inform what the priority should be. So the idea is if Ag Canada, who's got the resources, and BCRC, who's got the connection with industry, can work together, then hopefully we can move the whole research thing forward a lot more productively. So what these couple of lines really mean is that with those additional funds, by collaborating with Ag Canada, what that allows us to do is to not just focus on one-off projects at a time. We can try to spread those dollars over a broader range of projects and get a whole program going, or a portfolio of research projects that'll address a more complete scale of research. It also allows us to make some investments in research capacity, training new scientists, that sort of thing. As well, when you've got more research dollars, you have a lot more sway with the research community, and so it gives you a lot more influence in terms of trying to encourage researchers to collaborate with each other. And also, these increased funds have allowed us to put additional focus on tech transfer and extension than we've ever been able to do before. So what I want to illustrate here is that the national support for industry support for beef research has been going up. So back in 2001 through 2008, about on average, 6 cents of the national checkoff dollar was going towards research, and the balance was going towards marketing and promotion. So most provinces are allocating 5 cents of the dollar to research. Saskatchewan was at 10, but you average those all out across the country, it came out to 6 cents. Since then, it's been increasing. And first off, Alberta finally got guilted into meeting Saskatchewan and being at 10 cents. And then Saskatchewan wasn't about to be outdone, so they went to 20. Then Alberta said, well, we'll meet you there. And then BC and Nova Scotia went up to 10 as well. So we've got generally increased funding across the country, which is encouraging to see. And again, it averages out to about 15 cents now across the country, as opposed to the 6 cents where we started. A couple other examples: Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association a couple of months ago, out of their own provincial checkoff funds, they allocated $1 million towards a new research facility with the U of S. I don't think there's any timelines on when that's going to go, but they've made the commitment. And ABP as well has agreed to contribute at least $500,000 to the next beef science cluster. So my point here is that the BCRC isn't the only checkoff driven organization that's funding research. There's also some pretty serious activity in the provincial side as well. And it's not just Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba does as well, and so does Ontario. So now, why is research important? I learned how to animate slides. I'm really pleased with this. So kind of the obvious reason that industry funds research is that if we want to be a more competitive industry, if we want to raise higher quality products or produce higher quality beef or safer beef or more efficient cattle, more productive forages and that kind of thing, we need research to do that. But to focus solely on that really undersells the value of research. At the same cost, we can get some other benefits. Like, if we want science-based trade agreements or science-based regulation or science-based policy, we better fund some research to get the science to inform those things. If we want consumers to understand why we raise cattle and beef the way we do, we need to have the facts to back that up, and research can help us with that. And finally, Canada Beef Inc. they're the marketing group, and so they're the ones who they manage the other 85 cents of the checkoff and put that towards domestic and international marketing programs. They base that around something called the Canada Beef Advantage, which is really just it's trying to give people reasons to buy Canadian beef instead of competing proteins or imported beef based on a list of attributes that Canadian beef has, whether it's safety standards, whether it's quality, whether it's efficiency, environmental footprint, welfare, all that sort of thing. And so if we want to make marketing claims based on that stuff, we need to be able to quantify it and back it up. And research is important there too. And the last point here is that if we want to do research in all of those areas or fully take advantage of the research that we fund, we need to make sure that we have researchers there to do it. And that's what this professional capacity thing is about. It can be kind of a struggle sometimes to get public institutions to replace researchers that are hiring, especially in the beef and forage area, because that's really expensive research to do when you need land base or you need cow herds, you need people to take care of them. It's a big commitment. So that's a pretty big effort on our part too. So what I'm going to do, I just showed you this stuff and some reasons why research is more than just efficiencies and productivity. What I want to do is give you some examples of some areas that we're actively funding research in and give you examples of research that helps to fund several of these areas at the same time. One of them is food safety. About just over 10% of our research funding goes into food safety over the last couple of years. And a lot of that focus has gone into antimicrobial resistance related stuff. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. You see a lot of stuff about antimicrobial resistance in the news. Quite often that's driven by groups that are opposed to modern livestock production. These are all homegrown examples, by the way. This one's out of Saskatoon. And of course, they're blaming excessive use of antibiotics in livestock production, saying that that's what's responsible for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The Pew Commission, this one's actually out of the States, saying that they want to ban non-therapeutic use of antimicrobials. Canadian Medical Association Journal wanting a crackdown on factory farm drug use, so pretty charged language there in a, what you would hope would be a even-handed scientific journal. Of course, it makes the news. We got one from the Globe and Mail here. And Consumer Reports, overuse of antibiotics in food animals and what supermarkets consumers can do to stop it. So it's clearly been an issue for quite a long time. And to come up with solutions, well, before you come up with a solution, you got to define the problem. Make sure that you fully understand the scope of the problem before you can start to figure out what needs fixing, if anything. And so over the years, BCRC, and not just us, ABP's been pretty actively involved in the whole antimicrobial resistance thing too, in terms of supporting research that'll look into antimicrobial use and resistance in cattle and beef. And it looks like a really good news story for our industry, based on everything I've seen. And the science we funded, the results have come in useful. We've used that when we've been called to testify a couple of years ago now, before the House Standing Committee on Health. So we were able to provide our view of that to the MPs there, which was beneficial for everybody, I think. I have no idea what this is. The point of that, now it's not just the point of this, sorry about that blackout part on the top, I'll scream at Caitlin about this later. What the point of this slide is that this is actually out of the CPARS report, so the Canadian Integrated Program for Antimicrobial Resistance Surveillance. And so they do antimicrobial surveillance at packing plants, at vet clinics, and retail meat as well. And the results that they find through that survey program or surveillance program really supports what we've been finding through our industry-funded research as well. And so this is totally independent of us, but it's coming up with the same results. And really what they're finding is that when you look at the drugs that are of the highest importance in human health, there is extremely low, like 1% or lower, resistance in samples that they're getting from cattle, and that hasn't shown any sign of increasing over time. So, and I would have highlighted that. Anyway, it's like I said, it's a good news story. Here's a bit of a different way to illustrate it. These are the same results. So when they look at drug resistance in livestock or humans for that matter, they divide it into 4 categories. The very top one, so the top 4 drugs there, those are drugs of very high importance in human medicine. Those are drugs of last resort. We do use a couple of them in beef cattle. One's called Batril, one's called XNL. But anyway, we do use drugs of that very high importance category in cattle. The second one is, or the second category, the biggest one there, that's called high importance. The next one down is stuff like tetracycline. Those are called medium importance, which is kind of exaggerating their importance. Actually, tetracycline is used in acne medications, among other things. So it's not really high. It's not critical to human health. And the very bottom one, 4, there's no drugs listed there, but those are ionophores and something else, some of the sulfa drugs, I think. And those are ones that are not currently used in human medicine at all. So when we do this surveillance, what we really want to see is in this top four drugs, we want to see bars that are really, really close to that 0% at the bottom. And in beef cattle, so those very high importance, when we look at beef cattle, that's exactly what we see. Those top 4 categories, those bars are really, really close to 0%. And that's important. And they do this kind of surveillance in other species as well. Pigs are doing a pretty good job in that first category too. Other species, not so much. So the point here is that Canada's beef producers are using antimicrobial drugs appropriately and responsibly. Our information says that, independent information through CPAR says that. Some of that, at least, is probably due to programs like our on-farm food safety program, verified beef production. And the bottom line is that the evidence suggests that banning or restricting access or use of these antimicrobials in beef cattle would compromise animal health and welfare. Obviously, if they get sick and you can't treat them, that's exactly what happens. And it won't improve human health because we don't seem to be contributing to the problem in those highest importance categories. So over the next couple of years, we want to do some more research there. For the most part, we focused on E. coli in the past. We want to expand that to include Enterococcus, partly because they're susceptible to some drugs that E. coli is just automatically resistant to, automatically resistant to. And so we'll get a broader perspective on the impacts of cattle drugs on antimicrobial use or antimicrobial resistance. They're going to look at cattle and manure like they always do, but they're also going to collect samples of water out of retail meat and human clinical cases and use some pretty advanced genomic techniques to determine whether the DNA sequence they find in antimicrobial resistant bacteria from cattle are the same exact genes and mutations that they're finding in the same bacteria from humans that are sick. And so that'll go a long way to help figure out one way or the other whether there's transmission one way or the other from cattle to humans or humans to cattle. It won't tell us which direction, but it'll at least tell us whether there is a connection. Beef, I should probably hurry up a little bit here. So beef quality is another area where we've got research going on that not only helps the industry in terms of profitability and competitiveness, but also has benefits on the marketing side and consumer education side. So we did a beef quality audit that finished a couple of years ago, and it had 2 parts. One of it was a consumer satisfaction survey looking at how people like beef that they were buying out of stores. And what they did was they went and surveyed 1,100 consumers at stores in Montreal and Toronto and London and Calgary. They gave each one of these consumers a steak, either a strip loin, a top sirloin, a boneless cross rib, or an inside round steak. And they gave them the steak, they gave them cooking directions, and they said, give us your phone number, go home and cook this thing. We'll call you tomorrow and see what you think. And so they did this follow-up survey. And they found a couple of things. One of them was pretty obvious, and that was that people were more satisfied with a strip loin or top sirloin than they were with a boneless cross rib or inside round. There's no real surprises there. But what was really encouraging was that we've done this before. We did it in 2001, and we got some baseline measurements of consumer satisfaction in terms of juiciness, flavor, and tenderness. And what they found in the most recent survey was that every one of those categories improved. So juiciness was rated 8% higher on average than it was 8 years earlier. flavor was 8% higher, tenderness was 12% better. So I think that's, well, obviously that's good news from a marketing perspective. It's also, I think, a real pat on the back for beef producers when you consider the amount the industry's gone through since, well, 2002 out here with the drought and then BSE and all the rest of it, but all across Canada, they've been facing many of the same challenges, and to make the changes they had to in their production system just to stay in business and not lose sight of beef quality in the meantime, I think is speaks pretty highly of our producers. One other thing that came out of this was kind of cool. I said they sent people home with these steaks and cooking instructions, and they did a follow-up for a phone survey where they got this kind of feedback. But when they got negative feedback, like, you know, this meat was tough, they asked people, well, why was it tough? Was it because you cooked it wrong? How did you cook it? All this sort of thing. And what they found was, you know, the numbers were something like, when they didn't like the beef, 75% of the time they cooked it wrong, but 90% of the time they blamed the meat. And so that just sort of underscores a challenge that we know we've got some cuts out there, like that boneless cross rib, that are really, really hard to cook right. If you take it home and throw it on the barbecue, it's not going to turn out right. You got to slow cook this stuff, or cook it with moist heat. But it's really, really hard to get that message through to consumers. And I know the industry's been working on that since the 90s. So that's a challenge for next time, I guess. So we're going to do another beef quality. Oh, the other part of this was a carcass quality audit. They went to, I think, 4 big packing plants across the country, 3 times, fall, winter, and spring in 2010-11. They collected information on 35,000 head of cattle and carcasses that were going through there. I think that equates to about 1% of the national kill, if I remember correctly. And they looked at carcass defects on the kill floor, on the processing floor, and in the cooler. And I don't know how many of you are paying attention to our Fabulous Cattlemen articles. I know the current issue had an article by Mark Clausen about that consumer satisfaction survey I just talked about. And I think my column in this issue is about the stuff I'm talking about now. So this is bruising. And the US has been doing quality audits for even longer than us. So I've got US results on here in blue. Canada's results are in red. And if you look back at the first time we did an audit back in 95, just about 80% of carcasses entering that they found in Canadian packing plants had at least one bruise, one or more bruises. At the time, the US was at just about 50%. And so based on that first quality audit, CCA started what was called the Quality Starts Here program, which was a producer education program about here's what you do to avoid reducing carcass value, whether it's bruising or injection site lesions or whatever. And that started right away. And within 3, they did another quality audit in 98, and within 3 years, our bruising levels were down to where the US was. So when producers know what the right thing is to do, they respond really, really quickly. So that's encouraging. And bruising numbers have continued to go down. In our most recent audit, it's somewhere just above 30%. So we're continuing to improve, which is encouraging. A lot of that's probably improvements in animal handling, probably better facility design, better trucking, better loading, and fewer horns probably. Branding's another one. Branding's obviously a hot spot for activists. But what we've seen from the audit is that branding is becoming less and less common. These are fed cattle. And the first time we did the audit, 2/3 of fed cattle had at least one brand. It dropped pretty quickly in response to that Quality Starts Here program. Don't brand them if you don't have to, and use small brands if you do need to. And it's continued to go down. So right now, about 10% of fed cattle have a brand when they go to packing plants. So that helps, I think, hopefully in some of our consumer messaging that yeah, this hurts, but it's really not done unless we have to. And oddly enough, in some cases, branding is actually required by regulation. So in Alberta, the feeder co-ops, of course, they require branding so that the financial lenders can know for sure whose cattle they are, that kind of thing. And then also live breeding stock exports to the states still have to be branded because of the whole BSE regulations. Last one I'm going to talk about here is horns. So horns is a real hot spot because, of course, taking horns off is very painful. Nobody argues that. Back in '95, close to 40% of Canadian fed cattle had horns when they were going into the packing plant. That's any kind of horn. That's anything from a 1-inch stub up to a full horn, a foot long. That's really dropped down. It's under 15% now. This doesn't mean that 85+% are polled, but what it does mean is that they don't have horns, and so they're probably being dehorned properly at birth. Which, the general consensus is that absolutely dehorning hurts, but the best thing you can do is not have horns at all. Polled is the most welfare-friendly way of getting rid of horns, but if you do have to take horns off, do it when they're really young, before those horns attach to the skull. That is a lot less invasive and a lot less painful. The rule of thumb that I've heard from veterinarians is that if you see, in dehorning anyway, if you see blood, it hurts because the nerve endings end about the same place that the blood vessels do. And so just tipping them, just taking the ends off, might be stressful, but it probably doesn't hurt. But if you do cut them off and you see blood, then you know it's really hurting, and they'll let you know that as well. So we're going to do another beef quality audit. We need to do this stuff every couple of years, partly so that we can continue positive consumer messaging in terms of beef quality or our animal production practices, whether it's positive welfare stories about horning or about horns or bruising or branding, but also we can find ways to continue to improve when we do find things that are going the wrong way. So we can track our progress and figure out ways in which we can do better. Two other things are feed efficiency, forage and grassland productivity. We put about 20% of our funds towards feed efficiency, another 22% towards forage and grassland productivity. Feed efficiency is kind of an obvious one. That's where feedlots make or break. The two biggest expenses they have are variable expenses, or the cost of the calf and then the cost of the feed to grow that calf. And so if we can improve the feed conversion efficiency, that's a major benefit to the feeding sector. And if you look back at the 50s, a good feed conversion ratio was 9 or 10 to 1. And at this point, we're at 6 to 1. So that's very close to a 50% improvement in feed conversion efficiency. There's some, and in recent years, we've done us and a lot of other funders have focused on trying to find genetic markers to improve feed efficiency in breeding stock, as well as better ways to use byproduct feeds or feed processing so that we can continue to improve that. Forage and grassland, that's a no-brainer. Forage is essential for beef production. Roughly 80% of across the entire beef population, probably 80% of the weight that gets put on is done on forage alone. And winter feeding costs are about 2/3 of annual production costs. And so if we want to improve the efficiency of beef production or competitiveness of our nation's industry, we need to make sure we got the forage resources that we can rely on. And so we've done a fair bit of research over the last couple of years on trying to improve forage yields and quality, both through forage breeding as well as trying to figure out ways to grow it better and some grazing management stuff as well. Had some other thought there, but it's gone. So the point here is that Canada's beef industry, or cow, calf, and feedlot operators, are really, really efficient, and they have to be out of economic necessity when you consider, like I said before, the economic constraints they've been through over the last couple of years. But what isn't trumpeted nearly as loudly is that this goes hand in hand with some real clear environmental benefits. That's not what the consumer hears. They hear about factory farms, and all producers care about is dollars. They don't hear about the environmental side of things. They do hear about this. They hear about stuff like livestock's long shadow, which had some pretty misleading stuff in there, suggesting that livestock production contributes more to greenhouse gases than transportation does. So when this report came out, some of the popular press headlines were about how, cows are worse than SUVs, and that kind of spawned the whole Meatless Monday thing. You see things like this about how it takes 45,000 liters of water to grow a steak, or 2,500 liters of water to grow a hamburger. Those things are pretty misleading for a couple of reasons that I'm not going to go into. But what I do want to say is that our focus on the traditionally, our focus on the feed efficiency and forage productivity side has been on improving forage productivity, improving economics for the producer. But at the same time, when we've been doing that, when we've been improving forage productivity, we've been getting side benefits on the environment that we haven't been taking advantage of in industry messaging. And one point is the whole carbon sequestration thing. We've got an Ag Canada report that came out a year or two ago indicated that well-maintained native grasslands are as good at carbon sink as or better than old growth forests. You've probably all seen this picture here, where you've got a well-maintained, or I think it's a fescue plant from a well-maintained pasture on the left, where it's, the ground level is somewhere above where that white sign is, right? And all the rest of that below there is roots. And we see, I guess as a forage researcher, you might see real healthy roots, but as an environmentalist, you might see carbon sequestration in action. And so that's what that's about. That when we're improving forage productivity above the ground, we're also improving carbon sequestration above the ground. And so we can improve productivity for the rancher, as well as improve sustainability and environmental footprint things at the same time. So here's some nice pictures. I took this down south in Medicine Hat a couple of years ago, and this is two things. This is biodiversity. You got a hawk up in the air there, and so that hawk's probably looking for some varmints that are running around on the ground, right? You don't see a lot of that sort of thing in canola fields, right? And we've probably got a couple of hundred kinds of native plants growing there. The tree that's fallen down actually illustrates the point about the grasslands and the old growth forest. The reason those two are so different is that these native grasslands, they evolved in a really semi-arid part of the world. And so it was really, really important that those plants evolved to put a lot of growth into the ground so that they could survive a long winter dormant period and then have the root reserves to shoot up the next spring. And so when that grass plant dies, or if it burns off, if there's a prairie fire or something, it's just the top that burns, right? That goes back into the atmosphere, but the rest of that plant that's under the ground, that carbon stays sequestered. Whereas you got this tree here that dies and falls down, it doesn't have as much roots under the ground relative to the top compared to the grass. And so when that tree burns, or if it rots, it's a greater share of it is going back into the atmosphere. So anyway, that's pretty cool. And the cows are just nice to look at. So here, similar place. Here's a nice manure paddy out in the native grassland, and you can see we've got it contributing to nutrient cycling, and it's helping to sustain that new seedling that's coming up through the middle there. I'm not enough of a plant person to tell you what it was, but here's some more biodiversity. There's a pronghorn in the back if you squint just right. And this is cool. This is South Medicine Hat. This is some kind of a frog. I don't know how many of you get into that part of the world down, near the U.S. border and eastern Alberta, western Saskatchewan, but it is dry there. It's Palliser's Triangle, right? They figured there was no point in even trying to farm there because it just never gets enough rainfall. It rains very, very seldom. Is there a really lush year? And the year that I was down there, again, it was 2 years ago, it had been a really wet year, and there were these little frogs Everywhere there was standing water, there was these little frogs, and so these things go dormant. There's 10 or 15 years in a row where there's very little moisture, but these frogs are still there in the ground, just waiting for a year when it's wet enough for them to germinate or whatever they do, and they come up and they're croaking and looking happy. And the point here is that if this wasn't native range, you wouldn't see this. We might be able to have this in other parts of the prairies or Ontario where there's a lot of farmland, but the fact that it's constantly getting cultivated and we don't have a grassland ecosystem there means that some of that biodiversity is lost when we don't have the forage and range resources. Oh, here's another one. This is a yucca plant. There's only one place in Canada that this plant grows, and it probably wouldn't thrive under continuous cropping. Oh, and here's some cows in the rain, just illustrating the point that grasslands can make a real contribution to watersheds and reduce soil erosion and reduce water erosion and all those sorts of things. And then we got feedlots, which nobody likes to talk about, right? Because it's easy to tell nice stories about cows on the range and grass and biodiversity and all the rest of it, but what about feedlots? There's manure everywhere, and factory farms and all these things. But one thing, and this is a feedlot in Texas, and these cattle are all on Zilmax, which is a beta agonist, which we're hearing a lot about in the news. But the really important point to keep in mind is that a big part of the beef industry's reduction in the environmental footprint over the years is due to intensification. It's due to improvements in feedlot efficiency. When we improved our feed conversion ratio from 9 or 10 to 1 back in the 50s to 6 to 1 today, that means cattle are going to slaughter sooner. That means there's fewer days when they're walking around breathing out methane. There's fewer days that they're drinking water, fewer days they're producing manure. And so there's environmental benefits to the way we feed cattle. And if Canada was still raising forage cattle and beef the way we did 60 years ago, we'd need roughly an extra 45 million acres. In fairness, that's an extrapolation of the US statistic. We're trying to gather our own, but our production systems aren't too different. So, and actually they use a lot of Canadian data in coming up with this. So if we were to turn the clock back 60 years and raise cows the way we used to, we'd need about another 45 million acres to do that. Just for perspective, Alberta's got 52 million acres of agricultural land. And so the things we've done to improve efficiency in Canada's beef industry has, in effect, freed up the equivalent of Alberta's entire agricultural land base to use for other things. And so the real point I'm trying to make here is kind of contrary to popular messaging. When we improve our production efficiencies and use less resources to produce more beef for the same amount, that's environmentally responsible. Now, over the next couple of years, we want to collect, not necessarily collect, but we know a lot of data exists. We want to get it sort of collated together and synthesized into our own Canadian estimate of the environmental footprint of Canada's beef industry, including greenhouse gas production and sequestration, including manure production, including water use, and including biodiversity, wildlife habitat, watersheds, that sort of thing that are really hard to do. There's a lot of information available around this stuff, but nobody's ever tried to synthesize it all together. So we're hoping to do that. And we want to use that for two things. Firstly, we think we've made a lot of improvements over the past 30 years. And so we think that we can use that to inform the public about the positive things we've done. But we also know that we're probably going to identify some ways that we can do better. And I would suspect that having a lot of manure in one place is probably something that we'll need to figure out strategies to deal with. So anyway, we try to do our communication on this sort of all of this stuff. So what I got here, this is a screenshot of CCA's Action News. This is their email update that comes out every 2 weeks. It's free to subscribe to, comes out every 2 weeks, so it won't clog up your inbox. And I would encourage you to sign up for it for two reasons. And one is that every time There's some research related thing that comes from us. Tracy's going to talk some more about our other communication avenues in a couple of minutes, but yeah, that's one reason. There's always research stuff in here, but there's also other stuff in here. So about what activities that the CCA is up to. So if you're ever curious about how they're using your damn checkoff, you can use this and keep abreast of some of the issues that the CCA is involved in. So I'm kind of, looks like I'm starting to wrap it up here. So BCRC funds research to improve consumer confidence in beef demand, primarily through investments in beef quality and food safety side. We also fund a lot of research to improve production efficiencies through forage and grassland productivity, feed efficiency, and animal health and welfare, which I didn't specifically talk about here, but did touch on in the beef quality side, right, with that audit and the welfare implications of branding and dehorning. And as well as to support the Canadian beef advantage and to inform science-based policy and regulation. And a lot of the research that we're funding hits on 2 or 3 of those areas at the same time. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tracy and she'll tell you the interesting stuff.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Tracy Sackett and I am the Beef Extension Coordinator for the BCRC. So I'm going to talk about tech transfer and communications for a couple of minutes here. If you've got any questions for Reynold or I, you can type them in the box on the right-hand side of your screen. And then when I'm done my few minutes here, then we can answer any questions you have. So typically researchers will complete a study and then publish their findings in a scientific journal. But that's not terribly useful for industry, right? So tech transfer is about delivering the tools and the information that industry needs in order to make informed decisions and progressive changes. So that allows beef producers and other industry stakeholders to improve or better maintain the quality, the health, the profitability, and the longevity of their herd, their land, the carcasses coming off their cattle, and their overall operation. So tech transfer is about translating, packaging, and delivering information and tools to the industry so that they can utilize them. Generally, tech transfer in the Canadian beef industry is pretty fragmented and underfunded. And so realizing this, the BCRC took the opportunity with the first cluster to really expand their extension efforts. And continuing on through the second cluster, we'll be able to not only extend the results of the research that BCRC funds, but also to support the other extension groups out there in Canada to try to get a bit bigger reach for tech transfer efforts and make it a bit more efficient. So the cornerstone of our tech transfer initiative is our website. So it's www.beefresearch.ca, and the bulk of the information is under the research tab. So if you click there, you'll find all sorts of information, everything from basic summaries of research topics, like how feedlots optimize feed efficiency, or basic overview on bovine respiratory disease and that kind of thing. And then also more specific fact sheets, which give the results on particular research projects that BCRC has funded. And then later on this year, there will also be the capability for other groups across Canada to log into our website and generate fact sheets. So our website will really be kind of a comprehensive one-stop shop for all things Canadian beef research related. We've also got a blog. So we write articles generally once or twice a week. And this is our kind of avenue for announcing the latest research results, bringing light to old research information that may be relevant again, or providing tips for producers during the appropriate season. So I encourage you to subscribe to it, also free, and like I said, you'll see something pop up in your email probably once or twice a week letting you know that there's been a new article posted there. Our website's also got an events calendar. So here's a screenshot of what our calendar looks like for June right now. And there's a lot going on in Alberta. Everything that you see there is yellow is all in Alberta. So anything research related or tech transfer related happening in Canada, you can find it all on this calendar here. It'll tell you where there's conferences, maybe application or nomination deadlines for different things, or webinars like this one. If you go to our website on your mobile device, it'll look something like this. So it's pretty easy to navigate even on your smartphone. So if you're a producer out in the barnyard, waiting for a heifer to calve, you can read our latest blog post, or, quickly look things up when you're out and about. We're on social media, so you can find us on Twitter at Beef Research, or on Facebook as well. And this has been a really good avenue for us to not only talk to producers directly, but to get our messaging out to ag media as well. And YouTube. We've got a number of videos on our YouTube channel, which is Beef Research, on all types of things, everything from food safety to beef quality to forage and grasslands information. There's quite a few videos here to check out. And a number of them are part of the Beef Research School, which is part of the realagriculture.com. So if you're subscribed to them, you've probably seen our videos come out and featured in their e-newsletters. So all said and done, there'll be about 30 of these videos as part of the Beef Research School, and there's about a dozen of them out right now. So these videos will feature an industry expert, and then typically a producer who will talk about, how they've adopted it on their operation. So there you go. So if there's any questions for us, like I said, you can type them in the box on the right-hand side. Okay, well, I'll ask a question here for Reynold. So you mentioned some of the things coming up in the next few years, some environment research and that kind of thing. What other research and other research priorities does the industry have for the next few years?
Thanks. So I hinted at a couple of those, a couple of the higher profile ones, and some of them are around, like the antimicrobial resistance, the surveillance. The long-term goal of that antimicrobial resistance thing, quite frankly, is we would like to see that CPARS program that I referred to. That's a Public Health Agency of Canada thing. They, like I said, they look at retail beef, they look at cattle entering packing plants, and they look at vet submissions as well. We think there'd be value to extending that back to the farm level, and that's why we're supporting some of these research initiatives that hopefully will be able to develop the structure so that over time that can become a part of the CPARS program. So that's one of them. There's beef quality audits, another one that we need to make sure that stuff is going on a regular basis. On the forage and grassland side of things, we've got there's a number of different initiatives there. Those are focused for the most part on they're research, very clear research projects, but one real aim there is to get some really key researchers in Canada to train and mentor new scientists, so that when these researchers are just like me, they're not getting any younger, and some of them are much closer to retirement. So we want to take advantage of their skills and expertise and get them to train those skills in the new researchers in such a way that when those current experts retire, we have new people trained up to fill their place. What else have we got that's kind of excited? On the welfare side, we're wanting to do some pain control research. There's been a lot of pain control research done in cattle associated particularly with castration. For the most part, that research has been done on feedlot cattle. But the problem is, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, if cattle are getting castrated in the feedlot, they're older and they're bigger, and it's a bigger wound, and it may hurt more, but it certainly is more of a wound. So pain control there is a pretty obvious thing. The challenge, though, is that most cattle are castrated at a much younger age. They're castrated on farm at a couple of months of age or a month, but we don't know whether there's. Is anybody else not hearing me? No. I got a question from Rich. Okay. Oh, never mind. Where was I at here? Yeah. So there has been a lot of pressure or interest in there was the code of practice for beef cattle recently got or is getting revamped, and there was a fair bit of discussion there about the use of pain control in young calves. And one of the challenges there was that there really wasn't a lot of research that had ever been done in young beef calves. There's been lots done in dairy calves, not a lot on beef calves. So that's one of the things that we want to look at in the next couple of years. I think we have another question here. Question being, how do we address a research issue if there are no experts in that particular area? That's a good question. And there's probably, I'm going to dodge it in two ways. At least I'm being obvious about that. And one is that if there's no research expertise in Canada, we can sometimes get research done by researchers elsewhere. That doesn't help us in the long term. We get an answer that helps us in the short term. It doesn't help us in the long term. The other way, and actually there's a third part to it, but I'll mention the second part first. The other thing is that point is really, really important. How do we address a research issue if there are no experts in that particular area? That explains why we're putting such a focus on forage breeding and forage research with an emphasis on training new researchers, because we want to make sure that our forage experts have mentored new researchers before these experts retire. Because if they retire before we have a replacement, then all that kind of wisdom and experience gets lost. And we have lost a lot of it over the years, and we don't want that to happen again. So that's why we're trying to get these forage researchers training new scientists. Another one example is that periodically there's I'll give you an example. Ag Canada's got a guy in Lethbridge who funds, or he does research on ticks. And who cares? Ticks, right? It's hardly ever an issue. But when it is an issue, we're damn glad we've got him. So a couple of years ago, there was a excuse me, huge trade dispute between Canada and the U.S. about blue tongue and anaplasma, and Canada needed to have some expertise on, well, what is the real risk of blue tongue and anaplasma in Canada? Well, it turns out that we were really, really lucky that we had this guy in Lethbridge who was an expert in ticks and midges, because he could do the research and had the expertise to address that issue for us. So part of the advantage of maintaining this research capacity is it's sort of like a fire station, right? You don't want to build a fire station once the fire's already started. You want to make sure that it's there to respond to the issues when they arise, not sometime after. I mean, we saw that with BSE, right? When BSE happened, there was a huge scramble to get a bunch of BSE research underway in Alberta, and a huge investment went into that. And at the time, it was necessary, but it just having if you can maintain that kind of capacity kind of at a simmering boil, then hopefully that reduces the need to build something from scratch when an issue arises. Hopefully that answered your question.